Buenos días, un placer estar acá. My name is Ana Focasato. If you don't know me, I'm a PhD candidate at UW-Madison, and I've been working with regenerative poultry farmers doing social impact research and evaluation over the last couple of years. And today I want to foreground our farmer panel with some really high-level takeaways from farmer interviews, from focus groups, from farm visits over the last year, as well, and to talk about some of the motivations and the visions that farmers in this ecosystem have shared with me, as well as some of the challenges from the past year or two, and some of the ways that farmers are organizing to address those challenges. So it was great to hear Rehi's presentation this morning, because I think it aligns so well with everything that I've heard from other farmers and the way that everyone comes together here with some real shared values and shared vision for the future. And at the heart of these, these motivations, these visions, expressed by farmers, why they want to be in the system, why they're raising chickens, is this concept of collective governance. There's a deep desire and shared vision among farmers in the system for the system to be collectively governed, where farmers, workers, and allied community, but all communities, have a strong voice and play an active role in decision-making processes to create this cooperative system that delivers this equitable distribution of resources, fair compensation, and shared decision-making. And as one farmer eloquently put it in this quote that I have here, he said, "The whole social impact and governance part and working together is one of my top priorities and why I'm interested in being involved with this network of people in this ecosystem." So farmers really do see the regenerative poultry as a movement for large-scale ecosystems change. As well as many of the things that you see here. So I tried to just describe some of the key themes that come up, but there's of course so much nuance here and so many individual stories that make these different things, make up these different themes, but opportunities for immigrant and small-scale farming communities. But also I've heard many of the farmers who are in this room talk to me about how this system aligns with their values in terms of environmental health, in terms of animal welfare, in terms of human well-being, their health as farmers, and the health of their families. So these visions and motivations form the foundation of the work in the regenerative poultry system, and they really drive the decisions and inspire the collaborations and the work that farmers are doing. So if we go to the next slide, having expressed some of these, oh, sorry, I can go to the next slide because I have this. Okay. Okay, so having explored some of these motivations, I just want to share with you some of the challenges that I heard from farmers over the past year. So some of those things have been in trying to organize across the ecosystem, communication issues. So having insufficient updates or difficulty understanding who to reach at certain times, who to reach across the ecosystem for certain questions or for specific help. So really enhancing transparency of those roles and expectations within the ecosystem, which I know is a big objective of our gathering today, would really go a long way in fostering a stronger sense of collaboration and trust. Some farmers have also experienced more difficulties getting their paddocks established and coops, and have expressed a need for more technical assistance. And while there is definitely a lot of informal farmer-to-farmer support, farmers reported wanting an increase on the frequency of on-farm visits, providing targeted support for new farmers, and ensuring access to expertise, particularly during critical production times and when working to expand their operations. Another thing that I heard were financial strains, which have been a concern for some farmers when faced with low bird weights or a lack of clear or timely communication and feedback on how to increase the quality and therefore the final price of their birds. And in part, farmers report this goes hand in hand, of course, with the need for more technical assistance, but also for the need to further codify feedback and oversight procedures. And then, of course, and we'll hear more from our farmer panel about this, but farmers and the whole ecosystem have really experienced many different external disruptions that affect many of the other facets or the other challenges that we see on here. So from things like industry-wide chick shortages to avian flu to drought, and many other environmental and market level issues that add additional strain to all of these issues here. There has also been some confusion or uncertainty at times about how to best engage in decision-making processes, especially as the ecosystem grows. So how do farmers engage other partners, other people across the collective to discuss various, high-level and important issues like prices, contracts, sharing equipment, resources, and making these high-level strategic decisions for the ecosystem. So just to kind of wrap up here, one place where some of these conversations have emerged and where farmers have started to tackle these challenges is in the Farmer Affinity Group, which has been meeting for the past year. We meet every last Tuesday of the month over Zoom. And here I'd just like to summarize some of the key things we've been up to in these meetings and how farmers have actively been working to tackle some of these issues. So the meetings themselves have become a space to engage in collaborative learning and mutual support. They have served as a platform for farmers to share updates, to discuss challenges and celebrate successes with each other. It's allowed people to learn about, what's happening at other farms, exchange observations and knowledge about farming regenerative poultry. The meetings have also provided an opportunity, and a very needed one, for farmers to receive updates from key organizations in the ecosystem, such as RAA and Tree Range, including the latest developments, partnerships, new grants, and resources available, and providing, the space for them to ask questions and provide feedback to these key organizations. And then one of the exciting things that have borne out of these meetings is that farmers have been organizing around bulk purchasing of inputs and other ways that they can work to share resources and lower costs. So we've also been working in the space on ways to connect farmers with needed funding and grants and identifying resources to support their operations and drive growth. A particular area of focus during our conversations in these meetings over the past year have been hazelnut agronomics and exploring the development of the hazelnut supply chain as more and more farmers in the system work to establish hazelnuts on their paddocks. The meetings have also supported the development of different educational initiatives that are more about knowledge sharing and hopefully less about domestication, as Reiki was talking about earlier, but really the development of training and needed farming resources, and one of them being in tune with the regenerative poultry training curriculum implementation, which Louis has been leading. And then also partnering with me and some students at UW-Madison this past fall, where we did some capstone projects that we actually have a table right outside this room. We'd love for you to come check out some of those resources that students made. And then finally, I'd like to highlight that most importantly, the affinity group farmer meetings have created a space for this continuous improvement and feedback, where farmers can share their experiences, both positive and negative, and work toward identifying those areas of improvement, those ways that they want to be collectivizing together. So with those updates, very high level, I went through a lot of different things here. I want to introduce Louis Kemp and our farmer panel, Rodrigo Cala, Stephanie Kaufman, Chris Kaufman, and Cliff Martin, to share their experiences in all of this and really get a chance to go into some more details about all of this. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. So yeah, if our farmers want to make their way up to the stage, I'll introduce myself real quick. So like Anna said, my name's Louis Kemp. So I'm the team member that's lucky enough to get the FEED title. So I'm the Farm Enterprise and Engagement Director. So I'm the farmer-facing member of the leadership team, so I get to work directly with the farmers, be on farm. I've worked with and spoken with a lot of you already, which is just amazing. If you would have told me a year ago that this is where I'd be standing talking to all of you, I would have told you were silly. Back then I was just organizing Organic Valley's produce farms around their food safety programs. So this is similarly organizing farms, but in a little different perspective, I guess. But I also, last night I had a realization that I joined the organization June 26th last summer. And so I'm almost at 9 months to the day. So I am fully gestated in the ecosystem. So I want to thank you all for being at my birth. So I feel honored that I get to come into this ecosystem at the Convergence with all of you. So thank you very much. So with that, we have Stephanie and Chris Kaufman of Wild Apple Beef Farm in Wisconsin, Cliff Martin from Feed the People Farm right here outside of Northfield, and Rodrigo Cala up in Turtle Lake, Wisconsin. So these folks have all been in the ecosystem much longer than I have and have a lot more wisdom to share than I do. So we're just going to really have a kind of candid conversation about their 2023 season, talk about some successes, some frustrations. And I know this isn't about chickens, but we're going to talk a lot about chickens for the next couple hours. So I'll just let these guys maybe just introduce themselves real quick, introduce their farms, and maybe just mention how many flocks they did last season. If you want to start with the Kaufmans.
You want me to? Is this on? Yeah, okay. So I'm Stephanie, this is Chris. Our farm is located in Pierce County, Wisconsin. We are just upriver from the Rush River. So we live in the Rush River watershed. The farm that we operate on is third generation, and we still farm with my dad. And we currently also rotationally graze about 35 head of beef cattle. So we've been doing that for a while, but we wanted to diversify. Cattle are heavy and big and wear you out, and we're getting older. So we thought, let's try a smaller livestock. And I've worked for another nonprofit, Marble Seed Moses, and so I met Rehi a while ago and have been hearing about this poultry-centered regenerative agriculture system, and I really liked it. And so we decided to go this way. And we started last year, so we're newbies, so keep that in mind. And we put through 2 flocks last year.
Anything else?
1,500 each.
Testing. There we go. Hi, I'm Cliff. I'm from Feed the People Worker Cooperative Farm. And that's an important part of our farm's practice, is that we are a cooperative. There's usually 4 or 5 of us in a season who run just one production unit, which makes it a lot easier than doing it by yourself, I'm sure. But as a cooperative, we don't have a single boss. It's not just me. It's all of us together democratically deciding how the operation is going to run. I'm also here in half of my uniform as a cafeteria worker, as a union cafeteria worker, where we just won our first contract. And it's part of the, yeah, thank you. And that's important because it's a cafeteria at St. Olaf, which is actually part, at least I'm assuming sometimes, probably on and off, part of the tree range supply chain. So putting that into context too, for us, we're some of those farmers who are especially prioritizing cooperative democratic governance, unions wherever they can exist in the supply chain. That kind of stuff matters to us a lot. And we get to do that through the system. So our farm, we have 1 production unit. Currently, we are working on building a second one, but this season, starting in May when we get our first flock for this season, will be our 8th season in production with this system. We usually do 2 flocks. We've done 3 before, but sometimes we're lazy and we only want to do 2. So this season we're doing 2. We usually do 1,500 birds. We started a little bit smaller when our paddocks were smaller, but as we increased the size that we could have via the standards, we've increased that to about 1,500. I think that's all for my intro.
Hi, thank you. Hi, buenas tardes. My name is Rodrigo Cala. I am a farmer. I born in Mexico City, but I have the opportunity to be in this country. On 1998, I was working for a horseshoes factory and in New York, and then I moved to Minnesota. The reason I moved to Minnesota was because I grew up in close to cornfields and growing produce. So when I visit here, I really like to be in Minnesota. But the prices in Minnesota for farmland is so expensive, so I moved to Wisconsin. So this morning I wake up really early because we get chickens yesterday. Because with this cold weather, it's crazy. We get propane and set up systems. I mean, one of the hard things for farmers, my farm is diverse farms. We try to grow produce, we raise hogs, we raise chickens, we raise sheep. So I raise my kids too. So we are really, really busy. And one of the main things I joined these systems is because 5 years ago I started having troubles with climate change. In my farm we grow brassicas, broccoli and cauliflowers, and we make a good money, grow those crops. But then one day we start losing money because 75% or crops we throw away because of quality issues. So then we take out brassicas and we bring chickens. And one of the main things I learned with the systems is every season it's difficult because we learn new things. And so far last year we do four flocks. 3 flocks are okay. 2 flocks are okay. And the last 2 flocks, we don't make any good. We get a lot of frustration. And one of the main reasons, I was talking to my son in the last 2 months, and we agreed we want to make it. So the reason for that decision is me to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so we've heard that everybody's farm is pretty diverse. You know, none of them started as chicken farms. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that and how, was this system and its systems, was that what kind of brought you to it? Was it the ability to fit it into your pre-existing farm model? Was that what attracted you to it? Or has there been a bit of fiddling in terms of how the system has fit in to the rest of your farming dreams? And I mean, Rodrigo, you spoke to a little bit how you've kind of traded brassicas for chickens, but I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how it's kind of fit into your farming as a whole and how we really look at the efficiencies of the system, keeping it to certain labor hours for the whole flock. And have you been able to meet those efficiencies, and how does it look like on the rest of the farming that you're doing on your piece of property?
Okay, I see my farm like a big system. So when I want to try to do other things, but one day I traveled to Northfield and I see Regis Farm, and that thing changed my brain, changed my way to see farming. So then I thinking like, okay, I need to bring this system to my farm, and the reason is because we try to get many benefits from the same system, and I was thinking like, okay, we want to grow the trees, we can harvest the hazelnuts, we can raise the chickens and we can sell the chickens, but then we can harvest the manure so we can use the manure on our fields because we grow produce too. So I was checking another systems, another um, businesses. So then I decide to. It's no a small. It's not a big space because it's a little less than 2 acres. So I was thinking like, I'm gonna try one system on my farm. So then I can figure it out if I gonna build more coops. And the reason it's a diverse system. We can get benefits.
And for you, Cliff, and Feed the People, I mean, chickens are your main farming function, but it fits into many other pieces that you as a collective are working in. How has that fit in terms of division of labor and efficiencies and things like that?
Yeah, I think also just to our origins, when I was graduating high school in Northfield, I was like, wow, I have access to this familial land. It's my dad's land, which is the reason we could do this in the first place is because of that access. I was like, well, I just have access to enough acres that we could consider it. But it wasn't crop acres. It's all kind of rolling hill-ish, forested. In the 70s, it was all commercial corn, so it's not like it's this healthy ecosystem or something. But what that means is that when we looked and we thought, well, can we do regenerative agriculture in some way? The answer was, well, we certainly can't do crops. So what could we do? And guess what? The perfect system to fit into not flat ecology is this. And even cattle or pigs, like all these other models of regenerative agriculture focused on other kinds of livestock just wouldn't quite fit the ecology and the topography of our farm. But chickens is perfect. We already have forest. We have a mature canopy of black walnut trees in one of our paddocks, for example. It works well with chickens. It works well with different diverse types of land, at least in our context. And that's huge. That's the reason we were able to start this, is because it actually fit the context that we were working in. And yeah, it's the same thing where we use the word ecosystem a lot, so I don't want to overuse it, and yet it is the best word of like, yeah, this fits into this other labor that we're doing at our farm. So it's it takes some work to separate it from the rest of the entire operation. But the poultry, this system is the center of our work there, and the other component that we are building out is actually composting. We also run a worker co-op where we collect the curbside compost in Northfield and in Faribault as a separate business, but it's part of the same farm-based ecosystem where we're doing all of that labor. And we also have an old one-room schoolhouse that we host trainings and educational things and gatherings in, and that's all integrated as part of, you know, building our labor into one coherent system that can keep itself going. And that's a lot of what appealed to us in starting this model, is we're like, oh, this looks like it could actually make enough money with the right amount of work that we can sustain the finances needed to run this place, you know, and pay the bills. And that is true. And splitting that there again between 3-4 people just makes it a lot easier. And we just kind of go through some, you know, peaks and valleys of the workload, right? And maybe this will come up later, but the short version for us, right, is that prep on the front end, we put a lot of hours in to get ready, and then, you know, get the chicks delivered and get them functioning. And then whenever we're switching paddocks, we're putting in a little more hours. And then at the end, when we're actually processing and cleaning up, that's a lot of hours. And in between, sometimes I only work like 4 or 5 hours a week tops. Me, you know, as one member of that team. So it's been very easy for us to figure out how to split that labor over time. And the thing that probably makes the biggest difference is we are on our 8th season. We are like, oh, we actually know what we're doing. we did not feel that way when we started, but after, you know, a number of years and a number of flocks, it's like, oh yeah, we got this. And as the system changes and grows, we are able to integrate changes very easily because we just feel a lot of confidence in the foundation of running it that makes that integration of, you know, the system over time a lot simpler for us. I don't know if that answered your question, but it's what came to mind.
Thank you. Kaufman's? Beef first, then chickens?
Yeah, we started out with beef mostly because we wanted good beef to eat. And it got us living out in the country, not in town anymore, which we appreciate. And doing the poultry and chickens fit in nicely with it. The amount of labor it takes on a daily basis is not bad. And we both work off the farm too, so we have regular jobs, so to speak, which those keep us busy as well. So we're morning and evening taking care of what we need to take care of in that aspect, and we have some help with one of our sons and Stephanie's dad as much as he can. But it works well, and we eat pretty good too.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about some challenges, especially in terms of weather last year. I know we started out really cold and kind of wet in the spring, and then the precipitation stopped pretty much for all summer, and then I think we had another cold and wet extended fall. So when you look back at, how that affected production, what were the biggest challenges in terms of weather? I mean, you start with the Kaufmans. If we didn't know, their coop is a retrofitted dairy barn, so that they have a very cool system.
We were in kind of a little pocket in Pierce County that wasn't real dry. We got enough rain at the right times where we had good hay crop, so that was not much of an issue for us last year. As far as the heat, we found out with our first flock, Rodrigo was there, when we were loading our chickens, it was 95 in the barn that night, and we got about 800 of them in, and everybody's like, yeah, that's it. And so he came back 2 days later, and we got the rest of them. So that was a challenge there, but a short-lived one. We got through it and got it done. But and we started with our first one a little later in the season. So and then as it got cold in November with our second one, there's a few things, freezing water, stuff like that, but it wasn't real bad.
And Cliff, so Feed the People is one of the few that has a full canopy in their paddocks. So I'm wondering if maybe you had a little easier time.
Yes. Yeah, it's funny. I remember last season in particular, but this has happened before too. Everybody else in my world of agriculture, from conventional farmers and like my neighbors to other organic regenerative farmers, just talking about how bad the drought was. And I was like, oh, I haven't even noticed. Which is wild, because really the input of water for us is our chickens drinking water, and that's just coming from the well. And while I have long-term fear about the aquifers replenishing or not, the actual regeneration of paddocks still wasn't that difficult. And I am assuming that it can be attributed to this established canopied ecosystem that we already had coming into our operation 8 years ago, but also the development of, it's all the root systems, right? It's the entire perennial food forest model, I think, at play, really retaining water. And I could be wrong about that. In our paddocks, both of them actually, one of them is almost entirely sloped, and the other one is sort of a mound. So water flow throughout our paddocks can really lead to erosion, right? But the thing is, we have very established canopy of black walnuts. We have an okay established underlayer of hazelnuts. They don't do that well under black walnuts. Shocker, nothing does. But we do have some hazelnuts, and they're better in some places than not. And then we have comfrey. And I don't know how much comfrey is part of the conversation for everybody's farm, but those perennial root systems, I think, make this really big difference for actually retaining moisture, for keeping the paddocks actually healthy and balanced, even in a drought, and even on a slope, right? So I think that is where that comes from. Maybe there's more context to it. But the other really big difference about weather, because the thing I definitely worry about most is heat, for sure, it's shade. Having that high canopy of shade just makes the biggest difference in the world for chickens. And you can just watch them. They avoid the sun, they stay in the shade. And when we have a lot of shade, that means that they aren't crowding into shaded areas. They can be dispersed throughout the paddock and experience that. So I am truly shocked at how little drought has seemed to affect us in our system last year. And I look forward to that staying true and testing that more, but it has been remarkably consistent year after year, regardless of broader climate and weather conditions.
And then Rodrigo, I know you had some trouble later in the season. It seems like you were a wet, cold fall. And I know when paddocks are still being established, there isn't a lot of canopy, and if it just keeps raining, then the chickens end up staying in the coop, and there's some issues around that. But if you want to talk about some of your challenges.
Yes, one of the main challenges for us is to set up the system in the right way in our farm. I was talking with Regi, I was talking with Arnulfo, with Luis, with Stephanie. Even I don't talk too much with her, but I see her chickens, and yeah, I was thinking, okay, how many steps we need to do for have the same quality of chickens she has. So we have a big list, and we really working so hard right now, try to figure it out the way to overseeding. We need to irrigate more or padlocks. I I get all the seeds from Albert Lee Seeds. I get a seeder. I gonna run two irrigation systems in the padlocks. We have a river. We don't have the right to use the water, but we wanna do on weekends. So so nobody gonna say anything. But just is, I was talking with a person in Mexico about chicken management. So so it's just the timing and the things you can do with chickens. And we know our mistakes, and we're working on that right now.
Yep. And so I know all of you, I've at least had small conversations with all of you about expanding. At least all of you have either talked about wanting to put in another coop or are actively in the process of putting in another coop. I know there's been a lot of challenges, but even in spite of those challenges, what is pushing you towards looking to expanding? And for those of you that are already doing it, what have been those biggest challenges that you've seen at the point where you're at and thinking about that expansion? We'll start with the Kaufmans.
Probably the biggest challenge is having enough time to get things set up. Because it really is, the time, the amount of time it takes to get set up. Like our first one, it was the old dairy barn, which was a monster, project to take all the old dairy infrastructure out. I think I spent a week in there taking out all the old dairy stuff and burning up angle grinders and all that. And doing a second one, same thing. It's just having the time to do it.
And Cliff, yeah, I know you guys just put in a road and have identified a new space.
Yeah, that was step one, have access to the space with vehicles. And we did that, and that was a matter of finding some financing for that. But we know that just based on the revenue and the profits from one production unit, we can pay off this loan that we got to install this road. And now that the road is there, we can begin construction. And honestly, for us, it similarly comes down to we certainly couldn't afford to take out loans. Well, I don't think we could, unless within the ecosystem there's more opportunities than I currently realize. But based on conventional financing, we could not afford to take out loans to pay, a construction crew, right, to come clear our trees, excavate, build a building for us, right? So we have to do that ourselves. We did the first one ourselves. We can do it. But yeah, time. It's hard when you are working on your farm, off your farm, etc. It's just hard to have that time for sure. The other, money we're less worried about because we have a lot of materials that we have come into that we know we can build a building with. That makes a big difference. One of the factors that won't prevent us from building a building, but does it makes us wish we could do it a little bit differently, is the ability to pour concrete. It made a huge, like literally one of the best investments we ever made in our first production unit was pouring a concrete floor in it. And first we built it, and it was just a dirt floor. And it was just a lot of work to replenish, season after season to get it ready for more chicks. Really worried about contamination from previous flocks. So, tarps on the floor. Oh, but then it's not level, so we're putting sand underneath, and it was just this fiasco. So pouring concrete, at least for the brooder space side, not for the entire coop, but just the brooder space area, made the biggest difference in the world. And that's one of those things where it's like, that's just enough money where it'd be really nice to be able to find easy financing for that's like slow, and steady and not high interest and things. And we don't need it to be able to expand. The thing we really face is the labor it'll take to clear dense brush and remove the trees that don't make sense to keep and that kind of thing. But yeah, it comes down to labor for us right now and finding the time for it. But the there's also enough flexibility with the requirements of the system that we know that the materials, really the recycled materials we have from lots of other building projects, we can use to build the right kind of production unit, because you have to meet the standard, but there's a lot of flexibility as to how you can meet the standard. It doesn't have to be, and you have to buy this brand new metal from Menards. You know, it's like we can use what we have to get to what we need.
Yeah, for us is my son. He works in construction, so he told me, "Hey, they taking down so many different buildings in the cities, and we can get the material for free." So, so in my farm, we're recycling a lot, many materials and things, plastic thoughts, different things. We give the second chance to reuse on farms. So my son, he right now he's trying to figure it out the way to put or organic, regenerative, and recycling farm. And 6 years ago, we taken down 20 greenhouses in St. Paul with a company. That company sells flowers, so we get those buildings, those frames really cheap. And right now we try to convert. We right now we building our second building, and is what this gentleman says. We have a place where we have concrete because it's a corral. So we building in the top. We building this building. The challenge is has enough time to figure it out what you need to take in apart. I mean, in my farm, I see the numbers and I start talking with my son and my daughter. Like, okay, we make this much money in this on this production on the farm, and then we can choose from chickens on grow with this crop. And my kids, they say, the chickens is easier because we working just a little bit in the morning and then a little bit in the afternoon. If we really set up the systems, automatic systems on, I mean, the water system or feed system, I think it's easier for my kids to try to be on the farm. They don't even if I try to push them to working harder, they say, no, it. Why not we get these tools to figure it out the easiest way to do that. My son, he is looking in internet to, hey, why not we buy this system and we can put in the chickens, or we can put on the sheep. So right now we try to figure it out all these systems to see less challenges on my farm.
Yeah, I'm going to pick on the Kaufmans one more time. Since you guys, last year was your first flocks, you did 2 flocks. I guess maybe weather aside, what was the biggest takeaway or learning from one flock to the next? Did you feel like there was something that you did in that second flock that if you had done in the first one, it would have taken away some stress? Or what was the learning curve from that first flock to the second flock in your first year?
I think learning about chickens.
Observing.
I've been a livestock farmer with cattle, and basically that trait as a livestock farmer where you're observant, you just kind of got to watch the animal for a while. I had to learn how to do that with chickens, right? Because I'd had some layers when I lived in town. A 1,500 meat bird flock is a whole different ball of wax. And you get them, and they're these little yellow puff balls, and they're so delicate. And so it was those things where we made some adjustments between the 2 flocks. One of the things was, as you probably saw in the video, there's the portable waters with the red bottoms and stuff like that, 5-gallon. Those suckers are heavy when they're full of water. And so trying to lift them over a 2-foot broody thing is really hard on your back. between the two, with the second one, we figured out having a hose go overhead that I would shut off outside of the coop when I wasn't using it, so it wouldn't, like start leaking and get the whole brooding area wet. And then turning that on and just leaving the waters where they were at and filling them up. So as somebody who's, creeping up there, my age, I'm like, yeah, that was one. The other one is how you train the chickens. So we did not introduce the water line. We have a water line in our barn and then one outside. And we kept using those waters because you like to use them with chicks. But we didn't introduce the first flock to the water line until they were 3 weeks old, and we should have done it sooner. And so we made that adjustment, and so the first flock, kept wanting to go to the waters instead of the watering line. And that was frustrating because as far as labor goes, I think that's where the hardest part of your daily chore labor is the watering, more so than the feed. And we ended up losing 30 birds that third to fourth week. I don't know if it was a virus or not, but I kind of wondered if dehydration might have contributed to some of those losses because they weren't getting it. They were just being dumb chickens. Anyway, so we introduced the watering line in week 2, and we didn't have any problems with that on our second flock. So it's that kind of stuff where you just are, oops, don't do that again. And like with the cold weather that we're getting, for those of us that got our chicks early, we have ours already too, is like, if you don't have a designated insulated brooding area, what do you do? Being observant and having to jimmy rig some things. So like we got a tarp up around the brooding area, and we're learning all about using propane right now. And, and then trying to balance that, being a conscientious livestock farmer, raising them humanely, with the practical side of money. You gotta buy this stuff, so trying to balance those things.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent answer. I guess now we can reflect a little bit on what Anna had talked about at the beginning, just kind of the ecosystem as a whole. I've seen all of you in our monthly farmer meetings, not all of them. Life, you don't have to come to everyone. Life happens, and I've been on all of your farms, and I haven't been through a whole season yet, so I'm looking forward to seeing what a full season of supporting you guys looks like. But when you think about tree range farms and the RAA and our monthly farmer meetings and what on-farm visits you have gotten and what we have talked about doing in the future, how does that make you feel? Do you feel like that we're transparent? Do you feel supported? Do you feel like we're filling gaps that would be there otherwise? Are there frustrations around maybe lack of communication or miscommunication? Yeah.
It's been pretty good. Excuse me. The support we've got, if we had questions or problems, we've always been able to get a quick answer. Even last year with our first flock, we had a couple minor things going on that we weren't sure what was happening, and somebody was out the next day, or even I think that day, and so that was good. And with the farmer meetings, there's a pretty good exchange of information there. If somebody's running into something weird, they can bring it up and get answers from somewhere else, something somebody may have already seen.
And the upfront training is incredible. Like I mentioned earlier, I really don't know a lot about chickens. I do now. But so those training courses, the hours of them, and all the work that was put into creating them are a very valuable resource. And we even being able to go back and reference it. And I know that you're working on those standards sheets, for each of the farmers, producers to keep on their farm as quick cheat sheets on different things. It's very helpful.
Yeah, for us it has been perfectly good. Having done this for 8 years, it's like the staff at the center of the ecosystem, right, who we call on. It's like that, I think, is maybe where the struggles have happened in previous seasons, and I'd say that hasn't been the case at least for us, for like at least a year or two, if not longer, because I think that, like, where there have emerged gaps from really fast growth is my impression, those gaps have been filled. So at this point, I'm like, oh yeah, if we have an issue, which is frankly pretty seldom for us, we don't often feel like, oh, we really need someone to help us through something, because we're like, we know what we're doing. We've been doing this forever. And that doesn't mean that we don't want more of that, connection to the central ecosystem that way, but it's not something that we seek just because we've been doing it long enough. So now that there's like visits and there's the monthly meet, we're like, wow, there's a ton of ways to plug into this network that didn't always exist, where we used to just call one or maybe two people if we had a problem. And that still is ultimately true. The thing is, I now have 3 or 4 people I can call for a problem who I know if they're not the person who's actually going to address it, they will get me to the right person. And that includes problems at 11 p.m. in a thunderstorm, being like, we have 30 extra chickens that need to get to this processing facility, and we don't have enough cages for them. And I know I can call several people, and we actually, deal with that and find a solution to it. Because that, even after how many seasons, it happens. That's farming. So yeah, I mean, at this point, this is we're so happy to be part of this system because we just get to farm. We don't have to run a business. And I probably shouldn't say that because you do have to run a business a bit. But compared to the business we run for our compost business, where we truly just we're doing everything, right? This is we sell the chickens and then to tree range, and then they distribute and they set up all the processing dates and they ordered them for us and they connected. They did all the hard parts. We just have to go raise chickens. So that's huge. And that fundamentally, that is why we feel like we can be part of this, because we have all these other jobs and projects and things we do. But because that we just get to plug into this ecosystem that manages so much of the process for us, and it's so easy for us to get support in it, that's what keeps us yep, this is absolutely the system we want to grow in, because it meets so many of those needs. And even when there's struggles, it's we know we're going to get through them. It's just easy to rely on the center of the system that way.
Thoughts, Rodrigo?
Yeah, it's the network we building right now. We have the confidence of admit our mistakes when we see another farms. We try to figure it out what they do different or how they do the things. And I think have meetings on our own languages, I think is important. We have confidence to talk about everything with the farmers, even if we don't think it's fair some things. We can be really, really open. And we have the opportunity to visit other farms, and we see new ideas, we see new systems all the time. We even, when we load chickens, we hear new ideas from other farmers, we do in this way. We put the pallets in here, it's the network, the important thing on this group.
Well, thank you, everybody. I think we'll open it up to some questions real quick. We've got a few more minutes left. Yeah. So the question was, what is the expected mortality for a flock in the normal amount of range?
With ours, our first flock, I think we lost about between 80 and 100. Our second flock, we only lost 31. Yeah.
Yeah, so before we started, I guess the goal is to keep the mortality at 3% or under. So that, for the most part, farmers in the system are pretty successful at being able to do that. Of course, time and unforeseen occurrence. You got things where, birds get shipped to the wrong place or something like that, and then, of course, there's a higher loss that happens. But for the most part, if you follow the standards that have been set for this system, you can be successful in keeping that lower mortality rate.
The main reason I asked how only one person mentioned it, so that that means to me you were being successful, but I want to hear it and everybody else to hear it and understand that aspect of it. You're going to lose some birds. Birds are going to kill birds. The bird that killed a bird might get killed too.
Yeah.
But you got to look at that aspect of it.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll throw in quick, just for having done so many flocks over so many years, that 3%, that like 1 to 3% is really realistic. We've had 2 flocks I can remember that had like mass death incidents, and one was an illness, and one was, they smothered each other in these really bizarre conditions. But if you follow the standards and you design the system to the intelligence of the chickens, you know, the way that the world makes sense to them, then yeah, keeping it to like, I think of it as like, yeah, maybe 100, about 100 die out of 1,500. So it can work really well that way. We've definitely found too that a lot of apple cider vinegar, a lot of onions and garlic, like those preventative things for illness. Like it's just you follow the system and it really does work. And then when you mess up a part of it and chickens die, you'll be like, oh, that's why that's in the system. That's why this is a critical component of it. But we've had years to learn that. But it works.
And I was going to mention too, and talking to the other farmers that have been doing the system for a number of years and hearing their experiences, like Rodrigo was telling us, you know, when you loading chickens, that's the bad day for the farmer and the chicken. That's not a fun job. But anyway, he had told us you need to, if you divide the space up before they go in the barn, it's a lot easier. Well, we didn't listen with our first flock, and Wilbur showed up with the truck and the crates, and he's like, "Okay, we gotta divide this up." So we used it, but we learned. That's what you do. And so with the second flock, we divided the space before the chickens came in for the night. So when we walked in there, they were all cozy and asleep in the 3 different sections. We weren't walking in and disturbing them, getting them riled up, and it went way easier.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about paddock management and the forage and the percentage of feed versus forage and maintaining the paddock health for the benefit of the birds. Does that make sense?
Well, actually, right after this, we're going to do a little exercise where we're going to talk about paddock management and actually do a little moving around. So I don't know if you want to talk really quick, if there's a...
One thing is don't be afraid of weeds. We grow really good weeds. I think we had thistles that were 9, 10 feet tall in our paddock at some points, and it worked. As they're in there more and more, they'll pick them apart. They fall over, but it didn't really hinder the growth of chickens anyway. There's a lot of bugs in the weeds, which is most likely a feed source for them as well. I think they'd eat us given the chance. But
They would.
Yeah, and just to give you some context, so this is our first year. So it was grazed by cattle, but the last 2 years there were no cattle grazing it. So that's why there were a fair amount of burdock and thistle and stuff in it. And so because of that, there was a lot of green cover and stuff. We also planted some sweet corn and sunflowers in there in some rows. We had not yet put in our hazelnut trees. So we're very much, when it comes to paddock establishment, we're very much on the new side of it. So we're putting our trees in in the next month as soon as we're able to. And then just trying to figure out how to keep the soil covered is the main big thing. Keep that soil covered because, man, when they get down to bare dirt, it's bare dirt or mud. And that's the thing you don't want on the paddocks, so.
Perfect. I think I saw one more question, and then we'll move on to the exercise. I think I saw one over here.
So I understand this might not be necessary for all farms, and if it's going to be addressed in the next exercise, we can just skip it. But I am working with a really sloped area that's going to require irrigation for the trees during the establishment period of the paddocks. Do any of you use irrigation, and if so, what forms?
The only irrigation we've done it hasn't been consistent and for perennials. It's been for regenerating when we're like, okay, we've rotated them from a paddock, they've left it looking like the moon, which we try to avoid now. That was one of those lessons of like, oh, we don't let them get, that's how you manage a good paddock, is you don't let it get all the way down to bare dirt everywhere, right? And you make sure they distribute all the areas that they're eating at. So the one time we've done irrigation, it's a big sprinkler, right, when they're not in the paddock. And that's fine, because they're not in there, right? And there again, we were watering the entire paddock and not just targeted stuff. But I think the easiest version is when the chickens aren't in there, it is easier to do things in there, right? If you add another system in there, they're going to poop on it at a bare minimum, and that's going to make it gross and messy for you to deal with your hands. Not to mention, who knows, depending on the irrigation or any other thing you add to their environment, they're going to interact with it in weird ways, and they might kill themselves on it. You never know. So like, avoiding doing something when chickens are in, I think, is the simple solution. And I don't know, we haven't had to water our perennials, so I wish I had a better answer for that specifically. But moving with the chickens, I think, is the easy answer for us irrigation-wise.
All right, let's give our farmers a hand. All right, we'll give the farmers a chance to get back to their seats. We're going to shake things up a little bit, do something never before tried. We're going to turn this room into a paddock. So I'm going to have Mr. Will Crombie. He's going to help me out.
Hello.
Hello, hello. And if we could get the
Check it out.
paddock management
Cool.
slides. But if everybody would want to stand up, we're gonna break everybody up. We're gonna plant. Some of you are gonna be trees. Some of you are gonna be
Yes.
chickens. Some of you are gonna be feeders that the chickens are extremely attracted to. So whoever's the most attractive to chickens, you get to be the feeders. So Will,
This is kind of like head, shoulders, knees, and toes for chicken farmers?
a little bit. Yep.
Okay.
So we're gonna start. We're gonna get our grid planted.
Okay. You guys ready to plant this paddock?
We already know what paddocks are designed for, so this is kind of a, it's designed to deliver the natural conditions that the chickens evolved in, and to give them space to forage, place for grain to sprout, protects them from aerial predators. And we saw in some of the videos, this is what a successful paddock generally looks like from head on. You see the two different sides. So we'll kind of, from a large overview, so the space requirements, generally the coop, so we're looking at 1 square foot per bird in the coop. So again, it goes all the way up to 1,500 birds, so a 1,500 square foot coop would be the maximum size before you start stacking. And then the paddock is 20 square foot per bird on either side, so 40 square foot per bird total. So again, you can shrink that all the way up to 1.5 acres. So 1,500 birds fits on an 1.5 acre footprint, 3/4 of an acre on either side. So right now, we've got a middle fence right down the middle. We've got 2 sides of paddocks. And if we want maybe every other row, every other person, if you want to be a tree, you just put your hands up.
We'll start with the first row.
We'll start with the first row,
First-
and then everyone who's not a
First
tree,
row, your trees.
come
Is
up
that
to the
okay?
front.
Is that all right? You don't have to hold your hands up the whole time, but.
But let's do
you know.
let's do every
You
let's do
get
every
it. It's
other
a metaphor. It's a metaphor.
and let's do every other person. So if you're
Oh no, I think every other row.
Okay, yeah.
Because then they can just stay the trees, and then the
Beautiful.
other people can be chickens and feeders.
Will's the hazelnut farmer.
Right, right.
Perfect.
Because then we'll have the space in the other rows. All right, so if you're a chicken row, rows 2, 4, 6, 8, you're like chickens and feed and sprouted grains, right?
Everyone who's not a
Come-
tree,
You need to come,
Come
in.
up-
You
come
need
up
to come
here.
into the barn. And we don't all have to do this. It might get crazy and crowded. So maybe if you want to opt out,
There
that
will
would
be
actually be
visuals up
helpful.
top,
Like
too.
stand at the back.
And I'll also mention, so
You're a
this doesn't
chicken.
necessarily have to be hazelnuts too. So you could be a sugar maple. You could be an
Yeah.
oak. You could be a locust.
Let's see, what kind of tree are you?
And it's always going to be spotty too. It's never going to be perfectly filled.
We got a hazelnut right here.
Okay, we've got a hazelnut.
Yep.
Beautiful. Okay, so now you can picture.
Next slide, or
Yep.
cue up the.
So this is what a fully formed paddock should generally look like. You got your rows of hazelnuts. We're sprouting grains between them, and we got the chickens coming in and out. So we're starting from scratch. So you got your coop, and you got water line. So those are the water lines in the middle. You got two sides, and let's pretend it's just covered in weeds. There's no
Yep.
trees.
We're gonna plant these trees.
So now what
you
we
ready
just
to
did-
grow?
Boom. So that's all of you
Oh,
guys.
you grew. You grew. It's a little faster in this cartoon version.
So we got our grid. And so right now, for the first 4 weeks, so all you chickens, so you're all happy inside the coop right now.
Yep, they're brooding.
So you're brooding.
You're brooding.
You
You're
got
tiny
all-
chicks.
You've got everything you need. You've got your feed, you've got your water, and you're in there for 4 weeks. So from the day that you arrive till you're 4 weeks old, you are inside that coop getting everything that you need. And so, but me and Will as a farmer, so a week before the 5th week, we want to start making sure that there's going to be forage in one of these paddocks for the
All
chickens.
right. I'm gonna go sprinkle some forage
So
out
a
there.
week
I'll be right
before
back.
these doors are going to open, pick a side. The farmer's going to go out and spread a bunch of grain. And he's going to do this every day for that whole week before the doors open.
All right.
So on that, maybe
It's
a
growing.
couple days before the 5th week, the lives of the chickens are going to change. So these doors are going to open, but it's just going to be, only a few of them. Only a few, maybe the really brave ones.
just kind of
They're going to kind of go out. Yep, but most of them, probably 90% of them are just going to stay in. But they're going to get used to the fact that these doors are going to open. And so
These are
after
brave chickens right here. Brave chickens. Yep.
And then after those first few days, so on the they're used to the doors being open. Maybe a few of them have gone in and out. On the first day of that 5th week, so these doors are going to open again. But I guess so now we need 2 pairs of people who want to be the feeders. So we got one.
Ooh, we got
need
a
4
feeder.
people. One. We need
Got
3
some
more.
feeders.
Who
Do
doesn't
we
want to
need
be a
the next
chicken
slide? Do we need the next slide?
Not yet. We're about.
Okay,
We're about
we're
there.
almost there.
Okay. So Will, you want to place the feeders?
Oh, I gotta bring the feeders out there. This is the hard part.
So the morning of
guys-
the first day of the 5th week, all feed and all water
Yeah.
is going to be removed out of this
You're
paddock.
probably gonna be like we're letting them out on this side. Yep, because we got the grain going there.
We've been
Some-
sprouting grain for a week.
Yep, right here. Your feed's right here.
Yep. And so the first morning of the 5th week, doors are going to open, and the farmer is going to come in and shoo all the chickens out. Get out!
Come on.
Get out, you chickens! Get out! Go out those doors. Nobody gets to stay in here. No, you get out. You get out. They're not going to want to leave. They're so used to having all the feed and all the water. Oh, no!
Hey.
Perry!
Get out of here.
Get out of here. That's exactly right. Yep. You got to make sure they're all out. And then you shut the doors. You close the doors behind them.
Yep.
Oh, little chicken.
And this is honestly the hardest part of this whole process, I think, is those first few days training the chickens. So that was really easy. Y'all are some really this is a great flock. I would call this a great flock so far.
So where are the feeders at? Who are the feeders? So all the chickens
Yep.
are going to be really attracted to you.
Yep.
That they're pretty much going to stay.
Tickle
so
'em,
you're going to put the feeders
'em.
right outside the front of the door so that
Yep.
they can go right out the doors and everything they need is going to be right there.
I would say it's important to add some supplemental shade. If you don't have shade over your feeders, also add supplemental shade. If it's a hot day and you're letting those chickens out, these young baby chickens who've never experienced the world in this way, it's really important to keep an eye on them those first few days and make sure they have shade, make sure they have water, and this is a critical moment. So you chickens, you good? You good? You got enough water? You got enough shade? Okay, cool.
And so for that first whole week, you've been sprouting grain on this side of the paddock. And so now the chickens are going to have access to this forage. But as soon as they're out here scratching up this on that first day, now Mr. Farmer, Mr. or Mrs. Farmer
bedtime. It's
are going to
bedtime.
be on this side.
Well,
sprouting grain.
I gotta shoo them back in first. Get back in there, chickens. It's nighttime.
Yeah, so the chickens aren't actually going to want to go back in at the end of the day now either.
Yep.
So we're actually training the chickens.
We have a song. We have a song.
Let's hear
How's
the
it go,
song.
Carly? It's your bedtime.
Go to bed, chicken.
So chickens go to bed. Yep. We clap our hands. Yep. We sing to our chickens.
Okay. And then, so the next day, so the chickens spend the night inside, doors are closed. The next morning, we're going to take these feeders and we're going to move them farther out
'em-
into the
yep,
paddock.
Keep them feeders moving.
So make it so that the chickens can still see it when the doors are open, but it's just a little farther out. And then, so the second day, doors open again.
We got to get we got to get it on the cartoon
here we go.
version
Yep.
here.
So we sprouted grain on the
grain
left
sprouted,
side.
Yep.
Doors open. Feed is right outside the front door. So that's what we just did. But we also sprouted some grain on this other side. So while the chickens are moving on this side every day, you're going to be sprouting grain on this side kind of as the chickens move down the paddock.
Or establishing your annuals if you're establishing like an annual cover. Just getting things set up, making sure that you're ready, because it's all in this moment. It's all about observation. You can see, oh, what's that little bit of dirt around the high impact area next to the barn? Okay, we need to get out there and spread some straw, keep the soil covered. Soil health principle, keep the soil covered, and it's also for the health of the birds too. If they get mud on them or they're getting wet, try and keep them dry and clean. So
this second, third day, we're just moving these feeders out. So now the feeders are a little farther out from the paddock, or from the coop, but we're still in the training period. So the door's open, and we still got to chase these chickens out. They still don't want to go out.
Chickens.
Get out. They're a little better. They know that their food and their water is outside. That's right. So at this point, it should be a little less difficult getting them back out, and they're getting farther out into the paddock. And you should have a succession, because you were sprouting grain over that week, spreading grain over that week. You should have a succession of sprouts across the whole paddock. Stuff that's just sprouting, stuff that's been sprouted for a couple days, stuff that's already maybe growing a little bit. So they have kind of a whole smorgasbord of stuff that they can scratch through. So again,
and they're well trained at this. They're well trained chickens at this point. If you're way out there already, like these chickens, they're in the habit. After a few days, they're in the habit. So
that's a great question.
if it's a rainy day, the feed can get a little bit wet. It's okay. We're trying to. They're finishing that. The ratio of feed, how much you're putting out there, is going to be what they can consume in that day. If it's a downpour, you need to think about an alternative strategy, maybe indoors. But very few times are we keeping birds inside and putting feed
More
inside.
the extended
They're
periods of rain.
animals. They can handle a little bit of rain, and giving them that freedom of choice is nice too. So they can choose to go outside or they can choose to stay inside.
Yep. So at this point, the feeders are about maybe halfway through the paddock, and the chickens should be really well introduced to the idea that there's not going to be any food or water inside, but that is where they are kept safe. So you turn on the light in the evening, and that'll be what attracts them. But after the 2, 3, 4 days of that, force the chickens out, and even in the evening, the chickens will probably just kind of gather along the edge of the coop, around the doors, not knowing how to get in, so they'll need some help getting back in as well. But after that training period, it's a very natural in and out, and you're just using the feeders to slowly move them across the whole paddock. And so like I said, as you're doing that, you're also sprouting grain on the other paddock. So as soon as one is depleted, you're just doing the same thing. So as soon as they're on the other side,
Should we actually do it?
Yeah. Chickens, get back here. You know what you're doing.
Come on, we got to get the blood flowing. This is what do you call it?
Chickens
Gym
are coming
class.
back
This is
to
like
their
gym
coop.
class for the Convergence. It's your bedtime, cause the sun's down. And that's when chickens go to bed. Yep, they do better than me. Yes,
Correct.
this is one flock, one unit,
Yep.
2 sides. Yep, one barn, 1,500.
Yep, in about 10 weeks. So 10 weeks is the full life cycle of a flock. There's no standard for how long it should stay on either side or the other. This is really when the observation aspect comes in, making sure that you're watching how well they're foraging, how bare the ground is becoming, if they've depleted that sprouted grain that you've put in. And really, it's anywhere from a couple days to 4 or 5 days per side-ish, depending on how regenerative the paddocks are and conditions.
Yeah. Everybody's paddock is going to be different. You just observe it. I like to get all the way to the end before I flip them over, but there might be a circumstance where I'm like, maybe not. Because you don't want to get out there and mow it. That's the thing. It's like you don't want to have to bring machinery into the picture, because that's why we have chickens. So get out there, chickens. We don't even have to shoo them at this point. I just go out there and open the door.
Yep, and they know.
Yeah. There they go. Jim makes the best chicken. He's full character right now.
I saw Cliff had his hand up.
Yep.
especially in that first, days or week or so when you're going to let them, you're going to shut the doors to the building to make them be out in the paddocks, getting the door open by sundown because that's when they want to go in. And sundown is important if you're going to do evening tasks. We fill our feeders at night because that is easier to us than filling them in the morning when they're already outside. But sundown is when they go in, and guess what? From spring to fall, sundown changes a lot. So don't just think of doing the tasks in the evening, because if you want to be there to shut those doors before predators get in, you have to think about the time the sun is actually setting throughout the entire season. So just flagging that.
It's almost like we're like connected to the cycles of the world. Is that it? What else we got? Oh, we're still cruising. Oh my God! Oh my God! Go
goes
go
back,
go go
back and
go
forth.
go! Chickens.
So, and like you heard from Stephanie and Chris, so they don't have the trees in their paddocks yet. They've got them ready to go, but it is a matter of providing them artificial, or not necessarily artificial, but providing them shade through other means. So they did a really great job of planting rows of corn and sunflowers. So, if you don't have trees, it's easy to plant the corn and sunflowers, but if you have baby trees, then doing it in between the rows so that the tall corn and sunflowers comes up between the little baby hazelnuts and provides that canopy, and kind of mimics what the hazelnuts would do, and doing that to give the hazelnuts a chance to come up and provide that canopy over time. Any other input or any other farmers here that have done it? Think we missed anything?
Observation is key. It's like playing a video game, right?
Can you picture an app?
Real life.
Farmville,
Yeah.
regenerative style? All right, well, thanks.
Thanks, y'all. That was
everybody.
fun.
All right, and we got a little bit of time until lunch, but we're going to move on to a little fireside chat here. Me and Rehi, we're going to talk about the first 10 days of chicken's life and a little bit about breed selection and just some chick talk. So the question was, how long do the hazelnuts take to actually provide canopy? It can differ depending on how good the soil is, how well they're taken care of, how well the weeds are managed. And as far as canopy, you're transplanting them when they're maybe 12 to 18 inches tall. And within the first few years, they'll get up to waist height, if not more, which is, plenty tall enough for the chickens to be under. And then it's just a question of when the hazelnuts will start being produced, which is more of like a 5 to 8 year timeline. Potentially shorter with the chickens. They help quite a bit in terms of the hazelnut production. But yeah, the hazelnuts go quite fast in terms of just their stature. So, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so the question was if the corn and the sunflowers is also used as a food source for the chickens. Absolutely. I mean, they'll forage on that just great. Whether or not you want to actually put effort into processing those or drying the sunflower seeds or the corn or how you want to utilize it, that would be up to you, but absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Hi, Rehi.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining me. So we're going to talk a little bit just about chicks. I know Rehi's got some chicks.
I love talking about chicks.
Yeah. Well, you've got quite a few of them back at home. And I know there's quite a bit of challenges going on right now in terms of the chicks and just the weather and a bunch of different aspects. But before we kind of dive into the actual issues or successes, I feel like I wanted to kind of set the stage for, we have a lot of questions about breed selection. And just kind of anecdotally, this year at one of the conferences with our materials that has a lot of the pictures of the chickens in the grass and in the trees, that someone actually came up and said that we were misrepresenting what we were doing because all of our pictures are of egg layers and not broilers. And so they were trying to educate us on the fact that we were misrepresenting what we were doing. But in fact, those are not egg layers. Well, they could be egg layers if they were alive long enough, I guess, technically. But yeah, maybe we just talk about kind of what went into why we're using the birds we're using and why they look the way that they do, why do they act the way that they do, and maybe why someone would assume that they weren't meat birds.
Yeah, and it's actually the banner sitting outside that was being referred to. And those are actually meat birds. So in the world of chickens, and Theo, maybe you can pull out that one of those pictures. I think is like previous to the last. We'll talk about all kinds of things. We'll go. I just got photos to show you. Keep going until we get the chickens. There. So when we started this work, I spent 2 years just watching chickens. There were flocks of 10 chickens per flock. We had 50, 100, 500, 1,000, 1,500, 1,700, 2,000. We got it all the way to 2,000. And we observed them. And I mean literally, it was my 8, 9, 10, 11, eventually 14-year-old younger son. Same son, just different years. And so we observed them and tracked them, first without fences, by the way, so we could see how far they would go. When you look at this graph, this is the graph that I was given when I spent 2 weeks in France looking at the largest free-range system in the world, led by the La Ville Rouge. And we learned back then what a system looks like. It wasn't about producing chickens. It was about everything that was built infrastructure-wise, support systems, enterprise, production protocols, standards, the Ministry of Agriculture having an office specifically dedicated to overseeing that. That would be like the USDA here having a regenerative poultry department, to give you an idea. That's system level thinking. And so we looked through all of that. And in the middle of all of that, Sasso, which is where this comes from, had perfected over 30 years the breeding of chickens for meat. Now, as Louis said, if you let those chickens beyond their maturity time, remember the rooster that crowed another? Okay, so that's just the point at which we harvest them. At that point, they will start laying eggs, some eggs. They are really not bred for eggs. And so that's like another 2 half-moon diagram for egg layers. What you will find here is that Sasso, which controls about 60% of the 135 million broilers raised in France alone, and now they ship them all over the world. In fact, we have Sasso in my farm. All of the breeds right now are Sasso. And we got 3 breeds that we selected for our system that met certain criteria, right? So the criteria was very simple. You look at the far lower right-hand side, you got the heaviest male crossed with the heaviest hen. So that gives you literally the Cornish industrial broiler. Very difficult because they grow very fast. Their organs develop really slow while their bodies blowed out. And so you have something like, first thing I learned about them is that they have this flip over effect. Literally, you cannot grow one of those breeds in our system. And we did. We tried them before we had fences. And then as we moved the feeders away from the barn, we noticed that about 20 feet away, they thought a lot about it before they actually ventured. They knew the food was there. They knew the water was there. And it's like, I really want that, but dang, I got to walk 20 feet to get to it, which is very different with the breeds we raise, right? Now, you can see that what is now, but we get to observe all of that. And one of the things that happened, I heard about it, never seen it, is that as they do that, in the morning they go out, the broilers, the heavier ones, right? At noon, about 2 o'clock, when it's the hottest part of the day, and if it's sunny and it's hot and maybe there's no wind, they go halfway through, stall, and flip backwards to get heart attacks. Yeah, it's a heart attack, it's the flip over. And so they just flip backwards, and that's why they call it flip over. So I got to watch a couple of them do that. definitely was ready to grill them and everything. There's nothing wrong with the bird. And they were already bigger because the flip over doesn't happen when they are little. That's what you have on one extreme everything. And so I only raised like 10 chickens at a time. Back then we were testing 3 different herbal supplements, which now will be reintroduced now that we know what they do. Sage, oregano, and another one that is a trade secret, but I'll tell you later. And so anyway, the thing is, if you go from, say, 6 p.m., let's call that 6 p.m., all the way to 6 a.m. on the opposite end. The opposite end is lightweight chickens that take a little bit longer to grow, but they are the closest to the heritage chicken. Now, Sazo already weeded out the actual gallus, which is the ancestor of the modern chicken. Actually, the real ancestor is T-Rex, but we won't go that far. So as you look at that, those are the lightest, slower growth chickens on 6 a.m. At noon, you got the average, and at 6 p.m., you got the extreme. All of our 3 breeds were selected from 13 different runs that I did to observe their ability to range, how far, and all of that first without fences, and then we kept flagging their concentrations. We figured out that 200 feet from the door is about as far as they would go. Now, there is about 5 to 10% that will go farther, and all of them are females, by the way. Really fascinating because it was the males that went farther than Europe and came to this part of the world in the past, primarily. So you think about who the explorers are in the real world versus the colonizers. Anyway, enough of that. But storytelling is storytelling, right? What is a story if you don't actually connect it to those things? So what you will see also is that there's only 4 females in the male breeds. This is just the way their kingdom was built. Now, they may be colonizers too, and maybe they did discriminate against the females too. I have no idea. But the bottom line is that there's only 4 of those in that whole system, and there's a lot of males. And the male is the one that determines the characteristics of the offspring, which is very specific to chickens. I don't know what other species are like that. Again, I'm just the messenger, so don't shoot me. So now we live in our breeds between 1 and 2:30, maybe 3 p.m. So if you look at the 3 breeds that we grow, the Royal Broiler, the Freedom Ranger, and the Saso. Saso is more like in the 2:30 p.m. The Royal Broiler, the colored one, the speckled one that we grow, is more like 1 p.m. It's way closer to the original white Plymouth Rock and the Barred Rock. You can see their characteristics coming out really strong, right? Because they are not as far removed. That's how we pick breeds. This was not something we just one day decided this is what we're gonna grow. All of them that we grow here follow very specific criteria. Capacity to range, their ability to scratch and do all the chicken things. If you track the industrial system, they debeak them, they cut their beaks, and they do that on purpose because when we observe this, over 1,500 chickens, they lose their social order, and they start becoming more aggressive. And because we wanted to do straight runs, meaning we want to put females and males together, we don't want to have the hatchery euthanize the females because the males grow faster and bigger, and so that's what the industry and the conventional growers grow. We didn't want to do that. So we set up the system to accommodate the flock as it was hatched. And it's normally 50-50, 50 female, 50 male, right? So as you do that, the challenge with the confinement system is that they become stressed and it's all kinds of issues, and so they cut their beaks so that they won't peck on each other because the cannibalism is like the first thing they will do. A tiny injury on a wing or anything, by the afternoon that injury is a hole and everybody's eating that chicken alive. and you will watch, you will observe that because it will happen to all of us. And so we got to be observant because we got to be tracking that. And if that happens, we have to have the quarantine areas. And by the way, we're going to talk about the standards for that because I finally learned how to do it right. I failed too many times to be telling you about how to do it. So anyway, back to this, it doesn't mean we're not going to grow more. We're not going to go to 12 and maybe 11 or 10 a.m. in the selection. In fact, the best chicken, this is what I drool over. The best chicken is the naked neck. That is the chicken. I grew up with those chickens, and you can't sell me. Even our own breeds that we're raising right now, and even though all the chefs say this is the best chicken I tried, all of our markets, and Jen will tell you more about that, they're saying this is the best chicken. Honestly, they haven't tried the best chicken yet. I did. And I tell you, there is way more we can do. We will do that. We just can't do it all at once, right? That's the story of broiler breeds. If you go to the egg-laying system, it would be similar with the difference that the heavy layers will be on the right side. That means chickens that will lay more than 260 eggs a year. More like one every day, although none of them do. But the Rhode Island Red, for example, would be on that corner at 6 p.m. And the original Gallus would be on 6 a.m. We have never raised, well, I mean, I raised one of those flocks at my place. And there is a picture floating around somewhere with them under the hazelnuts. That's not what people are seeing out there. Those are all meat birds. So I hope that gives you a good grounding. And more than that, I mean, it's not about you learning all of this as in, I want to know, and I need to know what those breeds are. They're actually codes. They're not even names. Because that's how you do genetic research. But we figured this was important so that when you walk away, you can be guaranteed this was thought through and observed more than 2 years. If you want to modify something, always check first. When you get that urge to do it, lay down until it goes away. Most likely we have tried it, and if we haven't, it would be great to work with anyone to try those new things. But we're not experimenting here. It's animals we're dealing with. We have to be very careful. Don't change practices just because, your mom told you so. And by the way, I call my mom all the time, and she tells me things about the chickens. And I grew up with them, and she was the one teaching me about how to find the nests in the wild and all of that, right? And I like that. But then we got to take that and then systemically and professionally and scientifically test those things. Because if we don't, we're going to pay the consequences. For example, and Louis was asking about this. And can we switch to the pictures at the beginning? So this is my barn, uninsulated. There is no, we didn't put cement because we still want to make sure that if we can make the barns work without cement, that we don't. Now, the bacteria that could concern some folks is not an issue if you actually disinfect them right. And we have only used vinegar, and it's sufficient. And take the samples of the material, and you will see it's not an issue as long as we do it right. The challenge is that as you see those walls, they're not insulated. And the building inside drops the temperature just about the same as outside. And so the first year, we brought the first flock thinking it's already going to be warm. And we would just put the space heaters, the propane heaters in the middle, and they will hurtle around because they go for the heat. Nope. Now, this is 2 years ago. I should have so known better than that, right? Yet, exactly at the time that the chickens arrived, it started raining, the wind picked up, and the temperature dropped to 40 degrees. There was nothing we could do about that. And so Wilbur actually said, we better just euthanize them because there's no way we can heat them in there. And so the first night, we put a tarp over, kept them alive just for that first night. 6 a.m. in the morning, I'm in Nards. at Menards, in the way to Menards, designed this shelter, 16 by 16. Did some basic calculations for weights so that I could pick up the right carabiners, the strength of the rope, calculated on the weight of the boards, brought a little scale in my pocket, and I took one of those 2 by 4 by 16s and weighted it. And so I could say, okay, if I divide that into 4, I would have this much weight on each corner. And then I put a board across so that I could put a rope. And by about 9 a.m., we had this, and then move it forward in the pictures. This, we put a transparent ceiling so we could get light in, but also block the heat from getting out. Keep going. Then we put 16 by 16, gave us the ability to buy 12 by 16 tarps. No need to cut them. Also, 16 by 16 means 1 by 2 by 8 slats, mean 2 slats, no cutting, right? So even in a rush, we can be thoughtful about this thing so we don't just labor, right? So even though I only lay down for about a minute, I still did so that I wouldn't just go and react irrationally, right? And 16 by 16, do the math, and it gives you a circle that is exactly what we need to actually even expand that circle to keep those chicks in there even more than 5 or 6 or 10 days if we have to, which is the case this year, which presented us with a whole new set of challenges. Once we had that, putting using the roof to support them, we raised this up. We overlapped 4 feet of the 12-foot wide tarp, so we didn't have to cut it. Overlapped on the top. That means we had 8-foot walls. And those walls went right out to the ground. We put the same circle as we do. We put 2 heaters, and we only lost about 80 chickens in that first night, right? By the second night, they were definitely stressed, and they had suffered through the first, so we lost another 80 probably. But we're talking about 1,500 chicks. And by the third night, we lost 1 or 2, and we're back to normal. Even though there is no insulation, the wind was still blowing, the temperature hadn't risen, and so we knew we had the beginning of at least a way to manage this even with uninsulated barns. Now, if those barns even had a ceiling or even minor other infrastructure, it would have totally changed things. Back to Stephanie's point before, we also learned the price of LP. By the way, if you're gonna buy tanks, gas tanks, you may have to go to Menards to get the first load, right? I have 25 of those cylinders now. But I don't take them there to exchange them. I take them over to Rent and Save, or any other of the places. When they fill them, it's about 25% more gas, just so you know. Okay, and that, right now, our cylinders are on low, and we put them in at 6 p.m., we can go to bed, and we know that 8 a.m. the next day, they are starting to flicker. And that fine-tuning that was critical, because as you go on Saturday to the farm, you will find that our challenge this year was that the temperatures were just way too low. We started at 30 degrees. It rose a little bit, but right now there is 3 flocks of them sitting, and that's all the infrastructure we have. And yet we're not losing. We lost chickens the first days, but here's the thing. Sometimes it's out of our control. This year it was. We can maintain them warm in there. We knew that. Yes, it was going to cost more in the gas, but on the long run, say you spend 2 more cylinders of gas, that's $40. Well, how much does it cost to make that building insulated, put a cement floor in it, and heat, and normal heat and everything? You're not talking about $40, $40,000 maybe. Right? So it's still, when you look at the economics, if I'm going to do this for 20 years, I still come ahead using the LP tanks. Now, there is climate and other considerations, but for now, let's just be practical, right? Now, we were expecting our chicks this year at about noon on March 6th. So I was up in Minneapolis at a gathering and, thinking about coming through the farm in the evening so I could turn the heaters on, because you do that the night before so that the ground warms up and they don't. Remember, you ever touched one of those little puff balls that someone's, I mean, seriously, you want to cry, not eat them, you know? So anyway, the thing is, their tiny feet, if though, you know, they touch cold ground, that is going to suck them, their heat instantly. Not only that, they come already dehydrated. They have had no food. They have no energy left. They are very vulnerable. And on top of that, you put them in those conditions, you're going to lose most of them. Well, they came the day before. They was supposed to arrive on Wednesday afternoon. They arrived before noon on Tuesday. I was up in Minneapolis. My brother, who was at the farm with another friend, is like, what do we do? Turn the heaters on. Everything was set. In fact, if you move to the next slide, actually before that one, we had it was already set like this. And we were going to turn one of the heaters in the night on high. It wouldn't matter if it had died out in the middle of the night because it would have warmed up that space and all of that. Well, we didn't have any of that. And that simple change in the process cost us 77 chicks on this barn, 80 on the next, and 90 on the third. Just to give you an idea, this is so critical. It's almost like if you don't do things right on the first 10 days, you really, the rest of it really is not that relevant, because that's when everything is set. That's when the mortality is going to happen then in the largest volume. From an economic perspective, it's actually okay, because you are not losing $10 chickens or $6 or $4 chickens. You're losing $1.25 for the chick, and they haven't eaten much, so you're not maybe $1.30, $1.35, which is still a loss, and it's not okay. These are creatures, right? But it's very easy to blink, and something like that happens. Now, on the second day, we lost 2 chickens. Everything was completely associated with the fact that we hadn't warmed up the ground, and then the new heaters took a whole afternoon and half of the night to actually create that radiant heat that they needed. I think we got to just like pause and take that in, because I don't think a lot of folks, when they come into this space, realize sticking to protocol is non-negotiable. And yes, we don't want to be dictating anything. Nobody wants to be doing that. We just want to build consciousness to the fact that we didn't just come up with this stuff, you know. And yeah, we need innovation. We need to improve upon it and all that. Learn it and use it first, though. And then let's do something different. So anyway, that's a full circle. That was our agreement, but also the agreement was that Louis was going to ask me more questions.
It's fine with me. Well, yeah, so now that we have our breeds selected and a little bit of background, you talk about mortality kind of being the main guidance for knowing whether or not the chickens are getting what they need, but before that happens, what kind of observations can be made? What do you see in the flock before you start losing chickens? Are there things that you can make observations for in order to know to turn the heat up, know to give them something that they're not getting before you start losing birds?
So when they arrive, again, the first 5 days are the most critical. If you do everything right and you don't lose many chickens, and Stephanie's numbers are actually exceed expectations. I heard 30 chickens in one of the flocks. I don't think I have ever had a flock where I only lost 30 chickens. Maybe once, but I have raised like over 50 or 75 or something like that. So when they arrive, that's the critical time, right? So they will die because they don't have enough heat and they hurtle up. Now, they don't die because they are cold, just to be clear. They die because they pile up and suffocate. It's suffocation. When we saw that happening on the second day, one of the things we did was we kept dispersing them. We needed to do some more management because we were already trying to catch up because they got delivered on Tuesday. And so one thing we kept on was dispersing them. You know, when in the movies, when a guy gets shot and is dying, and they say, don't do it, stay awake, and all of that, right? Well, they're going to die not because of the injury, but because they lost that ability to keep the body flowing. That's what happens to them too. If they get cozy, when they get smothered, they actually get cozy because the bird on top is warm. Maybe the ground under is a little bit warm, and it just feels so good. And bam, you're gone, because they can't. If you ever, when you harvest birds, the same thing happens. If you push them against the corner, the ones on the bottom will suffocate. When Nick grew her first flock, I blinked again, and that flock, because it was only 750, I wasn't too concerned, but there were too many people loading, and we disturbed them too much, and they stampede to a corner. And that day, we actually had to bury 30 full-grown chickens. And I don't forget it, because it was my responsibility to not blink. But you blink, and that happens. That's why we are being so careful about that. So mortality happens on one end when they arrive because of those factors, and then at the opposite end, if we blink like I did with that flock, because they will die for the same reason. They will get suffocated much sooner than when they are little. And so another mistake we made recently is that, and this was just last week, so we had an accident with a vehicle in the family, and my brother and I were coming from Faribault right on the time to turn the heaters on. Well, it was a choice, right, between taking care of a family member versus the chickens. So we went and took care of the kids and the family member, so they were safe. It took us about 30 minutes, 45 minutes, but the sun set. This is last week, same flock. And so we rushed after that, rushed to the farm, and they had already huddled. We had 70 dead the next morning, 30 minutes difference, another blink, right? And so we have to be there. There is no option. And my brother and I talked about it, and he said, yeah, I mean, if you think of it, you'd have dropped me at the farm. And I said, yeah, but we were already 20 minutes. It was a 20-minute difference. You come to the farm or you go there. And it was the most excruciating 5 miles, because we had to decide that. And I instinctively knew, because of the temperature, that this would probably happen. And then eventually, it's one of those life things, right? You decide, okay, where am I going to take the risk? Because there is no option. I'll take it on this side, not on the other side. That was not negotiable. That's what we did. And that's what happened. It's only like, it's one of those things that you look back, you can't blame anybody. You feel sorry about the chicks. Yes, I'm totally going to blow the standard, because now we're looking at 200 chickens there in that flock. And that's what it is. And life goes on, and we reconcile with that. And then we come back to our spiritual grounding, and we apologize to those creatures. And that's all that we can do.
Well, you answered most of my questions. I think we're staring lunch down in the face. We can open it up to a couple questions before.
Feeders, open the doors.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Condensation? That's a good question. He's asking if there's any condensation problems.
Yeah, the pictures are not high resolution enough, but if you look in the middle of the floor, you will see these lines of water drops. So yeah, there's condensation, but if you look at this, it's got a roof. No water is actually landing in there. And inside is hot enough that the gradient built by the pressure, the atmospheric pressure inside versus outside, is dominant to the outside. So it's not gonna come in. It's actually not bad physics, if you ask me. It's pretty simple, straightforward stuff. So the question is about the overhead propane heaters. We don't, only because those require permanent gas installations and certified, inspected, and everything. And also it requires that you put a gas tank And we actually, sometimes it's just 2 nights like this or 3 nights. And it's only in the spring. I mean, the second flock is going to be warm weather already. The extent at which we have to build infrastructure to have those other heaters, it's just not worth it for the kind of need that we have.
I think I said another one. How many hours is the propane on?
Oh, the standard is ground temperature. So we have an infrared thermometer, and we're checking the ground that it never drops below 80 degrees. It only matters to the chickens, what? Yeah, 2 inches. That's all they care. So it's the ground temperature that matters. The air temperature is not that relevant. In fact, if you put a thermometer outside of that, it's probably like 19 right in the morning. It doesn't matter as long as the ground is 80. Now, again, heat, the physics of it is what determines how many hours you're going to keep that heater going. Because by noon, like even right now, or yesterday, for example, by noon, the gradient, the difference is such that the temperature that you got to keep it inside for the ground to stay at 80 degrees, the air temperature there is going to be about 60, 65. And if the temperature outside is 65, then you can turn the heaters off because that heat is not going to dissipate because the gradient isn't there to suck up the heat because it's holding it. I don't know if I'm explaining this right, but if the temperature outside is lower, then it's going to try to equalize. If the temperature outside, like in many days, these days have been 60, 65, then the ground temperature, once you get it to 80, it's going to stay at 80 because it's not getting equalized with that lower gradient. And so these days, for example, we turn one cylinder on at 6 p.m. and it lasts until 8 a.m. the next morning on low setting. The system has 3 settings. Those heaters have 3 settings. On low, it lasts all the way to tomorrow morning. We have a partial tank, and that tank, then we hook it on for another 1, 2, 3 hours, maybe somewhere in 10 a.m. Then we can turn it off because at that point, the outside temperature is good enough that they're not going to get cold. During the first 3 days, we kept them on 24/7 because they were still too little. After 6, 7 days, they grow secondary feathers and they can heat themselves better. And that changes the amount of hours we're going to keep that cylinder on. So that's the process. And you have to be taking that temperature continuously and tracking the temperature outside. And then based on that, decide how you're going to modify that. And the reason we use a partial cylinder during the day is that then we separate those cylinders so that we don't accidentally put a partial cylinder at 6 p.m. Because if that sucker turns off at 3 a.m., you'll find a pile of dead chickens.
All right, well, maybe we continue this conversation over lunch. Maybe one more question?
So because this year we started early enough, we get 3. If you don't want to do 3, if you want to stay on the safer side of things, once it warms up and before it cools off, then 2 is all you're going to get, which I don't think it's a problem either. I mean, thinking about all the stuff we're going through, although in this farm we're going to build a brooder and we're going to put one of those boilers and heat the ground. I mean, we're going to get better at this. And yeah, then we get 3 flocks, standard all year. The size of the birds at harvest vary. The standard deviation is probably around 0.75, 0.5 pounds, but the smaller ones will be coming out a live weight on the barn between 575 and 6 pounds. And then the larger ones are going to be more like in 6.5, 675. And then out of that, we're going to harvest birds, dressed birds between 3.75, some on the lower end. The outliers in 350, 375 to 390 for the average. And then some outliers on the upper end at around 4.25 pounds. Yes, but also remember, Cornish cross are harvested between 49, 45, and 50 days. We are harvesting at 70 days. So we already kept them longer because they are slower growth. Now, if we wanted larger birds, we could keep them to 80, 90 days, and those birds will grow to like 7.5-pound live birds. Thing is, Jen and Ted are gonna have to make that decision because we then have to sell them, and I don't know who's gonna buy them.
Yeah.
I think
Go
so.
eat.
And just
Thanks,
before
everybody.
you go, over here in the front, we have some sacred offerings that is traditional, especially for the Lakota. So you will find a peace pipe that was given to me by the Norwegian embassy in St. Paul. This is my spiritual drum, which also I painted with the diagram of our community system. And this is our sacred object for the system. And in this object, we have all of the key symbols of the system. The hazelnut, the elderberry, I haven't figured out how to put in there because it's a fruit. We got the corn and the beans, which are also part of what we fertilize. We don't have garlic because I haven't figured out how to do that either. Maybe a picture. There is a piece of biochar here that was done by Will Crombie's nieces. They brought that piece of biochar. The friendship bracelets, because that's fundamental to all of that, us. The representation of the predators that we work with, the crows, the eagles, the chicken. And then this is a gift from Nourish Studio, Renourish Studio, that I was advising way back. And so that's part of our extended networks. And this is a diamond willow, which grounds us on the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwas, who welcomed me for the first time in the Native communities here. So just so you know, this is not here for decoration. This is for you to meditate on who we are.